John Boylan and his younger brother Terry, whose nickname was Boona, they were wandering around Greenwich Village at the same time I was. They ran into me on the street and said how we're putting together a band, and they introduced themselves, of course. And they were going at the time, it was the summer between their freshman and sophomore and junior year in college at Bard College in upstate New York. And so in order to rehearse, I had to move up there with them. And I was sleeping on John had his own room with his brother. The two of them had their own quarters. And so I slept on a makeshift cot in the side of their room and slept there. And they had gourmet lunches there. I mean, it was a pretty expensive college, and I guess their dad was a pretty well-known physician in upstate New York, in Albany, I think, or Buffalo. And so I slept there and then went to rehearse in whatever, we had some sort of gymnasium or off the gymnasium room where we could set up and play. And slowly but surely I put together a makeshift piece of drum set, and we rehearsed. Also at the same time was this real funny guy named Chevy Chase, who was going there at the same time, and he was always doing things like tripping upstairs and bumping into doors. In the chow hall, he'd walk out the door, but he'd miss the door and go boom and exaggerate the actual, walking through the door. And there was also two guys named Walter Becker and Donnie Fagen, or Donald, but nicknamed Donnie. And also going there at the same time was a lady named Blythe Danner, and who is now a well-known film star. And so that's incidental to the story, but somehow we all got to know each other here and there, and I got to eat gourmet lunches every day and have a place to sleep and play music. And we decided that we were going to bring this band out of Bard College and bring it down to the city and play in the city. And we played a few clubs after, this was during the summer that was coming up. We did all our setting up and rehearsing all during the school year, and then during the summer we went down, experimented with actual playing in clubs and stuff and seeing what kind of reception we got. And so we did that, and we started playing in Greenwich Village because that's where the music scene was at the time, pretty much. But we were also working at clubs out of the city. And we eventually got to be the house band in a place uptown in Germantown I don't remember the address, but it's in Germantown, it's the east side of Manhattan, Upper East Side, kind of a ritzy part of town named Yorkville. So we got this job at this club called the Gordian Knot, and it was just supposed to be a weekend gig, and that was it. But it turned out that we got such a reception that they asked us back the following week. And after that, they asked us back for another 5 days or something. And we got to be the house band, as they didn't have any other entertainers that they liked better, and it was improving their business. So we were the house band for this club called the Gordian Knot. And we worked there for maybe long enough for me to get a brand new set of Ludwigs with cymbals and everything, top-notch set instead of a makeshift set. And we got new amplifiers and new speakers and all kinds of equipment. And we'd been there, even the word got around that this new band in town was working in this Upper East Side club, and guys like Joe Butler, who was the drummer for the Loving Spoonful, used to come up and see us, and we sort of befriended him, or he befriended us, and the club was drawing more people. And so one night, actually this was the last night that we played there, because we had already set up and people were drifting in and they were sitting down, and we'd done maybe a set, and then we took a break and we was going to do another set after a while. We got up and we were doing the second set, and as we started playing a tune and going, to the side of the stage there was a kitchen that served sandwiches and small, hamburgers, etc. And I noticed that in the door to the kitchen there was a serving window where the waiter would come out and bring the food to the tables that people were sitting around. And I noticed that there was smoke coming out of the serving window. thought, well, where's the cook? If he's not in there, obviously he's not in there because otherwise he'd be tending to the smoke. So I look around and he's up there way in the front by the windows shooting the you know what with the bartender. And I went, holy cow, it's up to me to let these people know there's a fire in the kitchen and let them know it, the workers. And so I had to do it without them panicking, so I just stopped and said, excuse me, I have to make an announcement. I would like everyone to not panic, because what I'm going to tell you is not immediately dangerous, but pretty soon. And if you notice that there's smoke coming out of the serving window in the kitchen, and they looked and they went, oh, I could hear all this response. And I said, now, everybody just carefully, please walk to the front doors right now, get up, don't grab what's very essential to you, and don't let someone in front of you, every time you bump into somebody, let them go first and just walk out as quickly as you can without jamming the door up. And so everybody got out safely, and John grabbed his guitar and all he could carry, and I couldn't carry much. I couldn't even get my jacket. I don't think I got anything. As a matter of fact, I could carry my drums out. And so John got his guitar, Terry got his bass, and so we all got outside, and I said, and I was also explaining to everybody, once you get out there, move to the right as far away from the club as you can, and to the left of the awning as well, because it could explode, you know. And so, but it's not going to explode right now, so please do it as quick as you can without jamming this door up and panicking. And everybody did just exactly what I said. And strangely enough, everybody got out to the right, and that I might add as an aside, there are people living across the street that were leaning out their windows wondering why they're hearing fire engines and stuff. And so what happened, we got outside and everybody got to the right and the left, and all of a sudden, whomp! There was this big explosion of the smoke ignited is what it was, and the room was thick with smoke, and it caused an explosion that blasted the front windows, the whole front of the club open, all the windows and glass anyway. And that people across the street that were watching what was going on got hit with shards of glass. And but everybody else was safe and sound. Oh, except for upstairs there were two casualties together. There was an elderly couple that had an apartment just above the club, and they suffocated or just died in their sleep, hopefully painlessly, from smoke inhalation. And that was the only casualties, fortunately, except for the loss of all the material things which could be replaced, but not their lives.
Appletree Theater. Does the name Louise mean anything to you?
Only that it's one of the tunes there, but I don't remember even playing on that album. You know, that's what's very mysterious to me, is I get credit for playing on the whole album, don't I? 2 tracks, okay, yeah. Okay. That may be true, because I was catching on a little bit as a known drummer that did sessions. So maybe that was how it happened, but I don't really recall it. I can't set it apart from any other of this, because I was helping somebody else out that was a folk singer that wanted a drum track put in on one of their songs. So I was getting familiar with being in a recording studio, you know. And I've never even dreamed that I'd ever get to that point at all. Somebody wanted to record me playing my drums, you know, which was a whole nother. I didn't even realize I was going to be a drummer until I was 13. And that is another story. After the fire and the breakup of the Gingermen, they came from a pretty wealthy family in upstate New York, I think Buffalo. And their father was a pretty important, well-known surgeon there, or some kind of physician. And so they went back there to recuperate, actually they didn't go there, they went with their parents to Florida to their summer home. And while I had to look for another apartment, I got this apartment right on the corner of Bleecker Street and Bowery. And the Bowery was known as a place where all the Bowery drunks, you know, would cohabitate down there on the streets and in doorways and real cheap hotel rooms, etc. And so when I ran into Bob and Roy, that was funny. When I ran into them, they said, would you like to play drums with us, we're putting together a band. And I said, yeah, but we need a place to rehearse in. So I said, well, I have I'm on the top floor of a 3-story walk-up on the corner of Bleecker and Bowery, and I had modified that. The great thing about it is it had a brick wall that was its connection to the next building in line on Bleecker Street, and it had a brick wall with a fireplace in it. So I would scrounge pieces of truck material that they used. They put planks on the curb so the truck could go up back into and unload its cargo on different storefronts and things. And I'd burn that for firewood for warmth at night in winters, and I made space so that we could set up the band in there in little makeshift corners. We'd put the bass player, and we had surround sound before I even knew what that term meant, you know. And we'd rehearse and then rehearse some more. And outside, the hobos and guys that were living in doorways out there could hear the music, and they all would gravitate to that corner of Bleecker and Bowery. And we could hear cheering after a while, and because as more people gathered, I could hear. We'd finish a tune if we got where we wanted or something. Or even before that, we'd hear yeah. And we'd look out the window, and there'd be all these guys and some women, all cheering and yelling and dancing in the streets, to quote a song by Martha and the Vandellas. And so that's how come that we call our first album The Street Giveth and the Street Taketh Away. And that was Bob Smith's brilliant thought. Bob had a great mind, he was a great talent, and a great person. It makes me want to cry. Excuse me. We somehow got a hold of a 1959 Cadillac hearse, black Cadillac hearse, to use as an equipment truck to carry this stuff, and a couple people as well, and then we got a second vehicle somehow. Yeah, we decided that since it was difficult to rehearse every day in my loft on Bleecker Street, that we'd moved to upstate New York, and the only thing I knew the place, first thing that hit my head was there was what they used to call an art colony called Woodstock, the city of Woodstock, or the town, village, whatever. And so we moved up there. We got there, and there was this big house, and it's just exactly what we wanted. It had a big meadow, and there was, strangely enough, there was a little tiny stage there that I thought was probably a children's theater or something, which I was wrong, and later I only found out recently that it was a whole different story. But at the time I didn't know that. It was a place owned by a lady named Pan Copeland, which we didn't know at the time. But she's very significant in the whole town of Woodstock's growth. So we started moving our stuff in there. I don't even remember, but I think we made a couple trips back and forth grabbing personal stuff and from where we had been living before. Because before that, Roy was living one place with his wife, I was living another place with his wife and child. I was living someplace with my girlfriend in my place on Bleecker Street. And so we collectively moved to that one house. It was right outside of Woodstock in Saugerties, and which I never even heard of until that time. And so we moved in, and the house that we had in Woodstock in Saugerties had a big old 1800s wood-burning stove, which heated the whole house, and we could cook on and stuff. Just before we left my loft on Bleecker Street, on the ground floor, there was a place called Pablo Light Show. They didn't even have a name yet. They were just guys that were experimenting with the mixture of oil and water and colors and making what they called later on light shows. And so at the same time also, the brother of the guy who was doing that was just back from Vietnam. His name was Dan Furbo. The guy who was doing it was Pat Furbo. And so Dan was looking for something to do, and we said, hey, we need a guy to help us move our equipment around, and we'll cover your expenses, and if you feel like coming and live with us, that's cool too, you know. Because he didn't have any attachments then. He was glad to have made it through the war, and he was just visiting his brother, and all of a sudden he finds this whole future ahead of him possibly. So he moved with us, and we got up there, and we went, wow, this is perfect. We placed there plenty of room to rehearse, plenty of room to sleep everybody, and a kitchen where I can cook in too. So we started doing our thing there for a while, and it was Dan's idea since there was a stage there, he said, you guys could play. There's a big field here, and you guys could play, and we sort of schmoozed back and forth about what we could do and what we couldn't, and we could also, maybe feed people with, stuff on this wood burning stove. So Dan Frippa went about reconstructing a bigger stage and making it so we could fit on it, and he moved it to the side against the trees, and there was a big spring that ran through the center of the field, so people could bathe in it. And actually, we had it turned it into a latrine with a frame made out of 2x4s and black plastic over the tops of it, and we separated it between guys and gals or something like that, and put little MASH type signs, guys and gals, and there was also a well at the top of the property, and where people could get fresh water of their own. It was a perfect setup. So we started the following summer. In the spring, we started doing a thing. We tried to figure out a name to do it. And we called them the Sound Outs. So we got up into Woodstock, and we started carrying our own light show with us, and when we'd take a gig, we'd bring along a screen, and Dan would stand back, and Dan ultimately turned into being our engineer, our sound engineer, so he could, it was just like a recording studio. He would stand way in the back or in the middle of the audience area, and with a set of controls, like a board they call it, and he'd boost the bass sound, or he'd make the mics, if it were one microphone, because we all sang different parts and stuff. So we actually did, outdoor festivals and carrying our own light show, and it broadened our audience that way, and got more people interested. And we still hadn't even signed for a record contract, and we had several options, but that comes later. We weren't interested yet in recording. I wouldn't say we weren't interested, but we were busy trying to set up where we were at the present time. We had become the house band at the Electric Circus, and they were doing light shows, so it all correlated into one thought from the Electric Circus on. And it was strange because having played the Electric Circus, and then Dan's brothers working with the same medium that the Electric Circus was, and we had also, since we had left the city, while we were in the city, we were putting out a mimeograph sheet of foolishness, for lack of a better word, called the All Night News. Since we were Cat Mother and the All Night Newsboys, it made sense. So we put out this little thing that we'd leave. The whole reason for doing it was to leave it behind to all the places that we played in New York, to let what they call a fan base know where we were, and we just didn't abandon them, the people that were coming to see us in the city. And so we started advertising through the All Night News, which we left in all these clubs in New York, that we had moved up. We were keeping everybody informed of what our changes were and why we weren't in the city anymore. And and we'd just make up these. Charlie Chin was really good in making up little ditties like the saga of Sarasota, sitting by the sea, sipping sodas solemnly, or something like that, all S's. So we left that behind and let people know what we were doing, and come on up to Woodstock and come to our summer festival. So here we are sitting in Woodstock doing gigs on an outdoor field and having these things that we made up as named Sound Out. The first gig, there was a moderate amount of people, good audience. I think we charged by the car load rather than by the people. And so how many people you had in the car, you could get it for the same price if there was 3 or 5 or it's 10. So there were people coming in on the hoods, all on the top of the car and on the hoods and in the back and packed in the trunk, and they'd get in for one price, and we got to be huge, pretty huge for us, for the size of the space that we had to perform in. And then we started getting the idea of maybe we could go to the store manager, Pan Copeland, and she'd give us a bargain rate on meat and potatoes and corn and stuff like that. As it turns out, we were boosting corn from somebody's cornfield. That wasn't very nice, but we got enough heads of corn to feed people pretty much, and potatoes were pretty inexpensive. But Pan herself donated a whole side of beef, which I hung on. The house was an old-fashioned rafter house, and to hold support the upper floors, and I hung this by the wood-burning stove. I hung this side of beef, and I would just slice off slices of meat and throw it on top of the wood-burning stove, and we'd feed people corn or potatoes with this steak for nothing. Consequently, each gig that we did kept getting more and more people until people were just pushing against the perimeter. Right on the other side of this row of trees, the circle of trees, was a housing development. So there were people in those housing developments could hear it, and we got some complaints, but not much. And by the time, the reason we went to charging by the car is because they couldn't pack all those cars into. We had no place for cars to park. We had a little space actually, but that was the whole point. We could get more people with less cars. So we had more people that could even fit in that huge space just on a blanket, And some of them slept overnight, some didn't because they lived close by or not. I don't know. But at night, someone would stay and someone would. We even made little camp places with stones around a little fire pit and stuff, and so you could get free drinking water out of a fresh spring, a fresh well or other, and there was a little spring that ran through it that we used as a latrine as well because it just ran off somewhere else into the Hudson River probably, which is where New York City dumps its refuse anyway. So that we had these sound-outs, and then the response was so good that the second time it got bigger, and the third time it even got even bigger, and the largest crowd that we'd had. At the same time, Jimi Hendrix was up, his manager and he were up in Woodstock finding a place for Jimmy to sleep because he had just been discovered and just been performing and gotten this manager. He used to manage the Animals, this manager. His name was Michael Jeffrey, without an S, Michael Jeffrey. He was up in Woodstock looking for a place for Jimmy to live, because he had been sleeping on a cot in Michael Jeffrey's Park Avenue office, underneath the stairwell to the other apartments up above. And he said Jimmy needed a house of his own, so he was up there, and he heard about the sound house that we were doing. I'm speculating on exactly how he did it, but it wasn't hard to find out. We get off stage, of course we billed ourselves last, so we got to do extra stuff. And we knew all the talent. We had all guys, people like Richie Havens and Phil Oakes, I think, was there, and a bunch of Jake and the Family Jewels, or maybe it was Bunky and Jake at that time. And a bunch of acts that we knew from being in the village, Greenwich Village. And so that's how we had the talent. So anyway, we get off the stage and we did our encore and another encore, and said, next summer, folks, and we get off stage and this guy walks up and he goes, hello, my name is Michael Jeffrey. He says, I manage, perhaps you've heard of him, his name is Jimi Hendrix. Duh, of course we've heard of him, And so he said, do you have a record label? And we said, no. Not yet, but we'd had a few offers, and he says, well, I could probably get you signed with somebody. I could get you signed with somebody. So he said, do you have a manager yet? I'd be your manager. And we didn't even know this guy, but we knew we knew who Jimi Hendrix certainly was. And so we said, sure, you can be our manager. And he says, and you can also open for Jimmy on his tours. We went, yeah, well, you'd have to think a lot about that one, huh? And so we went on the road with Jimi Hendrix, and that's a whole nother story. So we moved back to the city, so I guess we were more accessible to him, the manager, and being accessible to his business, which was managing Jimi Hendrix. And so we moved back to New York City in this beautiful hold the whole brownstone building, you know. And, well, it was on 10th Street and First Avenue, which is right on the edge of First Avenue and it's the Lower East Side, which becomes a Hispanic community, mostly Puerto Rican, which was a major, as opposed to California, which is mostly Mexico and Central American populated Spanish-speaking people. And Larry Packer was our guitar player at the time. We needed somebody who played violin and mandolin and lead guitar. He was in the basement and a single room. I was on the next floor, which was the ground floor, right off the kitchen. And there was one big bedroom there that I had. And then the next floor up was, I think was Bob and his wife Alice and daughter Jennifer, Bob Smith. And then above that was Roy Michaels and Ellen Michaels and their daughter Shaughness. And it's difficult to live off of right on the other side of a door full of screaming children and clattering dishes and pots and pans. David Susskind was having a show on communal living, and somehow he'd gotten two groups of people together. One was a teachers' commune of people. We weren't a commune, we just happened to be a band living together, but the term commune, not even in terms of Greenwich Village era, and that commune, and people knew what communal living meant, but we were just a group of people that would have the same common interests, you know, and we're part of a group, a commune. I think it was even the next day at around lunchtime, and in Manhattan, the streets just get crazy at lunchtime, whereas people are just front to back for blocks and blocks going in both directions, or all four directions. And everybody's out to lunch at the same time, everybody in Manhattan working or lives there, whatever. And out of this crowd of people coming my way is this little old lady, who's probably younger than I am now, but and she goes, weren't you on that David Susskind show last night and about the rock and roll bands? Was that you? And I said, well, yeah, thank you. And I'm surprised that she even recognized me because, you know, there's such a amount of people, you know, and she picked me out of this huge amount of people walking down the street. And I just said hi and thanked her for being nice and whatever. And she went on her way, and I think Bob and Roy and I were all together, but she spotted me because I think my hair was longer at that time than theirs was. For some reason, I don't know if she was probably addressing all of us, but me and my blabbermouth, I just shot off an answer right away and thanked her, and then we went on our way. And I don't even think we were going to lunch; we were just going somewhere else. But we had to travel by foot by then, or subway, because we didn't have a vehicle in Manhattan yet. And so that's what happened after that David Susskind show. Okay, it's the only place that we really knew where to head for, aside from San Francisco, but we didn't want to live in San Francisco, so we hit Muir Beach. So every day fortunately at Muir Beach there was a house there of people that we introduced ourselves to and told them our situation, that we were looking for a place somewhere in California, hopefully northern, even north of San Francisco. And so each day we'd venture out north, south, and east, and one of us would go each way, of course, and one would stay there, and we had a central point, which would be a home base, which was these people's house that I don't even remember their name. All I remember is hearing about the killings that happened in Altamont from there, and then from there watching their TV, and that just came to my mind that minute. But anyway, so one day Roy, the bass player, had gone north on California 1, and he called the central base in Muir Beach and said, tell all the guys when they get back from their adventure scouting for a new place to move to drive north on Highway 1 until they hit the town of Elk. It was about approximately 100 miles or so, or a little less than from where we were at the time. So we went up the Highway 1, and we hit this little town of Elk, and at the time, I think it's an Elk, California population 78 or something like that. Under 100. It was just like, yeah, very little small town. Now it's a historical preserve. They don't even call it a town anymore, and it's all been renovated just like a museum. This is, of course, 50 years later. It was just incredible transition from a winter, and this was in November, and it was sunny and maybe 60 degrees, and beautiful ocean lapping against the surf and rocks. There's a very rocky coast. It used to have a landing there for logging ships that would ship redwood to parts of the world, and of course that wasn't happening then. But there's this great little sleepy town there, and it had one gas station, and the garage owner had owned the place for 60 years, and one store with the same brother that owned the gas station. One was Mel Matson, the other was Walter Matson Sr., and Walter had the store, and Mel had the gas station. And how small a town can you get, And it was the smallest of the whole towns that we'd seen between San Francisco and there, and that was 100 miles north practically, So we said, this has got to be the most perfect place we could have envisioned, after leaving Manhattan with the mounds of snow with dog urine and cigarette butts in it, and a week later we're in paradise, with cows on the hillside and sun-bleached redwood fences that are homemade and hewn, notched together. It wasn't 21st century steel and plastic, stainless steel and plastic. And it was like I say, going from hell to heaven overnight, or 1 week or two. The first place that we played was the night that it turned from 1969 to 1970. And the only place that we knew about then, because we'd only been there a couple of weeks, a couple of months maybe, I don't know. And this guy who lived in the town of Albion had this house that had an attic that would hold, if you had a big party there with a band, it was big enough to hold that. That's how big the house was, but it wasn't huge. But a lot of people didn't know who we were. They just knew there was going to be a band playing there that came from New York. And so we set up there, and there was a big bowl of punch for people to have, that unbeknownst, we didn't put it there. I mean, we put the bowl of punch there, but somebody laced it with LSD. And but it wasn't a bad thing, actually, and I have a story about that too, if I should put it in. So we're playing in this attic, and the whole house was bouncing and vibrating, and there was a guy there that kept going around. He was wearing really straight looking, wearing a coat and tie, real businessman's tie. He looked like he was an ad executive somewhere in Manhattan. And so he was standing. We took a break, and then we took another break, and he had been drinking out of the punch bowl, and we didn't know the other people were. We had a little bit of LSD put in it, and because that was all the people that were there had taken LSD pretty much, and we knew it, and we even told people that it was there if they wanted some of that punch. Otherwise, there was another thing for them to refresh themselves with, another punch bowl that didn't have any psychedelics in it. And so this guy had come in the suit and tie and everything, and we did 3 sets, and I'm afraid that at any moment the whole house was going to crumble from all the vibration, all the people dancing up the stairs in the attic. And after the second set, I went down to get some air, and I'm standing in the doorway, and that guy that was in the suit and tie was standing there like this, looking up at the sky. And it was a big starry night, which is unusual on the coast because of the fog a lot of times comes in at night. He was staring up at the stars, and his jaw was dropped. Wow. And he looked down, and I said hi and stuff, and he goes, wow. He says, I get it. We are all one. Literally is what he said. And he got the whole point of taking real LSD. I know the media and society is afraid of LSD, but it did have its therapeutic abilities, because the acid that we put in it was developed by Timothy Leary, and it came on sugar cubes, and so we knew that it was the authentic stuff, or at least 99%, because somebody could have imitated it with their own acid. At the time, Owsley was making acid too at the same time, and so you had to be careful about that. But somebody had laced it and knew what acid was about and wanted everybody to be psychedelicized, and so we had all these dancing psychedelicized people dancing under the stars, and just had a whole new outlook on life, myself included. And I had taken it. The first LSD I ever took when I was still in New York, before even the Ginger Men or Cat Mother was formed, house for rent, and it was big enough to hold all of us, that had its own beautiful backyard, and behind the backyard was another big open field with a hillside that went all the way up. There was no houses or anything on it, and at the very top was a row of trees, fir trees, redwood trees, small redwood trees, and scrub brush, whatever, which they call a pygmy forest in Northern California. And on the other side of us was the Pacific Ocean. So we settled in there and started rehearsing, and I even grew a pot plant in the backyard, secretly. A lot of people would gather when we rehearsed in the town of Elk, because kids from the neighborhood would come running around, and the neighborhood was only a block long, and there was kids, all these kids that were from tall adolescents to young teenagers, and they had nothing to do, So they'd come and listen to us play and stuff and rehearse. And somehow we got involved with getting booked into playing the Boonville Fair, which is a weekend-long thing with farmers, local farmers, dairy farmers, etc. And so we played the Boonville Fair, and as in the same thing that happened in Eagles Hall here in Fort Bragg, and also happened on the ridges, when the police wanted to stop the gigs from happening because there were too many people gathered in one place and it was an unsafe environment. Name the excuses, They just didn't want young people to have fun, and it weren't hurting anybody. They didn't know he was getting murdered or drowning or anything. This guy named Stan Grossman had this property that had enough room for a huge amount of people, and so we did one of our what we used to call sound outs there, so people could hear us play, and the water broadened our spectrum, so to speak. Well, all I know is, from my perspective, was that they made us stop playing, and then by that time we had Taj Mahal there, I believe, talent that we knew from other gigs previous, and so there was quite a bunch of performers that people came from all miles around. And we also at the same time ran into a man named John Chamberlain, who was just a genius at graphic arts, and it was just all fortuitous, just everything fell into place at the right time in the right place. It was just something cosmic about it, and because it turned out he designed our second, third, and fourth album covers and all of our publicity. And we do local signs, and these signs are being now collected. His boogie signs are being collected by the Mendocino County Historical Society. We met him, and he started putting up these boogie signs, and then we started moving towards a big town called Fort Bragg, California, which was about 20 miles more north. And there was the Order of the Eagles had a big hall there where they had bingo games every Saturday night, and we got their permission to have dances there on alternate weekends or something. So we had these dances, and we'd truck all of it. I just reminded myself, coming back from one of those gigs in Fort Bragg to Elk, I saw a flying saucer with some other people. We drove back in a caravan of cars to Elk, and we saw, I don't think I even told you about this. It was some kind of strange bright light that was up inland about a couple miles. You couldn't see it. It was above the tree line, and it was hugely bright, and it just kept getting brighter and brighter till it illuminated. This was on a night that didn't have any moon. It was almost pitch black out, and it just kept getting brighter and brighter until you could see almost like it was daylight. It was like somebody had a big, huge, broad spectrum beam of light coming from just above the trees inland. Maybe couldn't estimate how far it was, but it was far enough to see above the trees. Wow, I just that just came back to me this moment, but nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, I bet that's the only time I even had any kind of suspected contact with extraterrestrials. Well, nobody else saw it except a few people. I mean, I don't mean en masse, because it was just only the 3 or 4 cars that were going back to Elk, which is that drive south from Fort Bragg to Elk. And 3 or 4 cars said, well, we all got to Elk and said, did you see that? And we went, yeah, it had to be what I think it was. I can't be positive. Who knows? It might have been somebody filming a commercial inland, with a bunch of floodlights. But I doubt it because it was in the air. It was above the trees. But what could it have been? What kind of flying vehicle does that? It stays motionless in one spot and sends out a 360-degree beam of intense light. It was like the sun sitting there, a tiny sun sitting right in one spot. And then in a moment it was gone. In a moment meaning 20 seconds or so.
So how soon after the first of the year, I mean, after you got here and you played Elk, I mean, did you make another record?
Well, yeah. That was because we had already signed with Polydor Records. Thanks to Michael Jeffries got us that contract with Polydor because we had heard that they had an $8 million budget because we were the first performers to be on their label in the United States. Before that, they were called Polygram, I believe, and they opened a branch called Polydor in the U.S. and so that's how we signed with Polydor. Our first album was called The Street Giveth and the Street Taketh Away because of our rehearsing and being born in that loft on Bleecker and Bowery. And the cover photo is the chalk that I drew in this alleyway to make it as funky and street-like appearing as could be. All the money that our manager was stealing from us got to be the money that Jimi Hendrix generated and we generated to build a recording studio called Electric Lady Studios in 8th Street in Manhattan. So we had to go back and forth from California to New York and to do a recording. But before we did, I think Alvin Duo may have been done in California. And then we did the 3rd and the 4th, I believe, in New York at Electric Lady Studios, so that Michael Jeffrey didn't have to pay any other people to record us, because he had his own recording studio using our money and Jimmy's money. I know that it was an ever-changing, Cat Mother itself was an ever-changing, we dropped some songs off our itinerary, or our whatever you want to call it, playlist, and learn new ones. And I wasn't a songwriter, although I write prose and stuff, but I couldn't seem to get it all fit together with music and stuff. But Smith was the most prolific songwriter, and he sang most of the songs because he wrote the songs, and Roy too. But I didn't write the songs, but I got to sing on Good Old Rock and Roll as a solo part of that whole song. And I did a lot of harmonies. I would sing both bass parts and soprano or falsetto parts on, say, a 5-part harmony background to whatever song we were doing, I guess our time was limited the more we went on. We didn't have as much time in the studio because the records weren't selling. And that's why we never made a 5th album, is because Paul just said, just drop them.
That if you look at your albums, if you actually chart out the Cat Mother albums and you chart out the side of each album, I think with one exception, from the first side of the first album, I think the second side of the first album is almost 30 minutes long. That's a lot of songs. But after that first album, there's almost every side is shorter than the one before it, to the end. Wow. I mean, it might be 18 and then 16 and a half and then 16 and then 15 and a half, but every side was shorter than the first. It just kept getting shorter.
So the total on the 4th album, at the end of it, the total amount of time spent on the last album was less than the one before it, and et cetera, all the way back. So the most albums were on the first album. That's something I never knew, never even considered thinking about. Bob wrote most of the material, basically, if you look at the whole picture. And Roy wrote a few on each album. Bob still most of all the albums. Charlie and I co-wrote writing the back of the Cadillac hearse. We wrote Bad News, and that's the only one. I didn't even sing on it, except I whispered on it because I had this idea where on stereo he'd have him singing on one side, and every time he'd sing Bad News, Bad News, I would go Bad News, Bad News. But they didn't boost the whisper loud enough for it to be recognized when you're hearing it on stereo. But those fans out there who still have the album, or are planning to get it, or stream it now they call it, boost this other side of the stereo on that song. You can hear the whisper overlapping on top of Charlie's Bad News. Bad News. I probably should have gone Bad News loud. Unless you remind me of specific things, I don't know if I can pull it up because I can't seem to recall the minutia.
The minutia?
Yeah. I like this. You know what minutia means. I don't have to because I didn't pay attention to a lot of minutia, so for lack of a better word. But
sure.
You know, even like in recording studios, I don't remember which recording studio we played this at or that. You know, I just remember just trying to keep my end of the act together. You know. But anyway,